Hello, these girls. Hi, everyone. Well, now, we are in the seventh session of the Despised Girl. And then today's session is very exciting because we're going to talk about the fiscal race to the bottom. Yeah, that is our title for today. And then why am I alone? Because, I bet that my friends, my colleague, my sister from the Despised Girl is still going to join us very, very soon. I think that a lot of them, maybe Amelia is having another meeting and then called, and then she's going to be here. And also Tetet will also going to join us really, really soon. So now we have a guest speaker, or we want to always say that our guest is usually what we always choose is one of the despised girls, right? Because we really want to actually have the guest that is also working on this issue, on the issue of economic justice, on the issue of tax justice, on the issue of climate justice. So now I'm going to introduce you to our guest today, which is Crystal. Crystal, hi. And then we see now my sister, this nice girl, is also
here. Sorry for coming in a bit late. You were right. I overheard you saying that probably Emilia is coming on from another call, and Tete is also having another call. And you knew it.
I didn't realize that you're already here. And then probably the other will feel like, why? They're here already.
Well, is Rina saying, calling us unpunctual?
Yeah, so now Amelia and Teta, I already introduced, what's going to happen today and then what is our topic today. And then I'm also saying that we have a guest today, right? We have a guest. Woohoo! I'm so excited. So Crystal, maybe you can start, a little bit, about yourself. Maybe you can introduce yourself, where you're from, and then which organization you work, and then what kind of advocacy work or process that you are engaged with right now, right? And then also why you are a despised girls also. Yeah, we also want to know that. Go ahead, Crystal.
Great. So my name's Crystal Simeone. I am based in Nairobi, Kenya. I hope you can hear me. If you can't, Rina, Emilia, Tete, please wave. Yeah, great. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. I identify as a Pan-African feminist. I am the director of a newish, I don't know if we're new anymore, we're a little bit over a year now, a new collective. It's a Pan-African feminist collective that works on macro-level economic justice, so issues around debt, around trade, around tax, around financialization, and really looking at it from a Pan-African feminist perspective and taking into consideration our history, our current context, our nuance, and really giving it our voice from our voices in our realities, which sometimes is a little bit different from, the global north or other regions, but really giving a strong Pan-African voice to these issues that is truly, truly rooted in a feminist ideology. So that's what I do. In my spare time, I garden. Through COVID, I've learned that I don't kill plants and they actually stay alive with me. So that's been really, really exciting. I go to the greenhouse a lot of times, and I'm currently breaking out in some allergy to something. So I have a cold compress. If you see me, it's just that it's a bit hot and itchy. So that's me.
Lovely. You have to tell us all about this Pan-African work that you're doing, because let me tell you, our audience is actually people who are really interested about what is this crazy advocacy world, what is this, why global, why feminist, why decolonial, why can't I just stay focused on demanding my national government or my local government to do something about the problems. And this show comes and say, no, you have to engage in global as well. And then you come to emphasize the relevance of regions. And Rina has a lot to talk about that too. But we're going to give you the privilege of, as our favorite guest of the day, to tell us also why is it so important to have a feminist regional work, and why is specifically Pan-African.
So Pan-African is a shared identity. It's a shared identity that came up post-independence in the days of the great Sankara, the great Nyerere, Senghor, all these great leaders who were charting with other leaders from the global south a third way, which is where this idea of a third, the third world came from. And I always thought it was derogatory, but it was basically our leaders saying, listen, we're not really going to go with capitalism, and neither are we going to go with communism. We're going to chart a third alternative, a third way that centers citizens at the heart of our development plans and our thinking and our policy making. And that's where ostensibly that term came from. This whole Pan-African idea, I think, at that time wasn't very feminist. It was progressive, it centered citizens, but it wasn't really rooted in feminist principles. But I feel the growing of a new Pan-African wave that centers feminism at its heart. And this idea of Pan-Africanism is really a shared history, a shared context, and looking together towards a shared destiny and future collectively as a continent of Africa. We're one people without, we have shared history as much as our colonial past was very dividing. Our problems really were the same, but also taking cognizance that we're part of a global community, right? But at the same time, there are very global solutions for very, very local problems. And our world is so interconnected because of such a hyper-globalized situation. We have to engage in global spaces, especially in a context where the economy and the governance and rules around the economy is made in what some people call an apartheid of decision making. It's done by a select few, mostly in rich countries in the global south, and these decisions have such an impact on us. So the work we do at NAWI, for example, it's twofold. It's two very heavy fights. It's an anti-patriarchal one, which is feminist, but at the same time, it's an anti-neoliberal, anti-neocolonial, anti-colonial struggle at the same time. So it's multiple fights at the same time. It sometimes feels impossible. It's thankless. It's very long. It's like running a marathon. But I sort of encouraged by, there's the likes of everyone in this room, the Despised Girls and everyone else who are doing such great work, and the solidarity amongst different regions is really, really encouraging.
Wow, that is so inspiring, Crystal. And it's really true what you say, no? It's such a hyper globalized world that all our struggles are also interconnected. And I think that's the beauty of it. No, we struggle, we're connected, and we dream. We try to make that dream happen also. So I'm so happy because this is the first time that we're actually having somebody from Africa. No, and yes, because Rina and I are both Asians. Emilia is honorary Asian. We're honorary Latinas. But now it's the first time we have somebody from Africa. So this is truly a global South. A truly global South evening for all of us. So, Crystal, please let us share some of your insights and experience, because our topic for tonight is about the fiscal race to the bottom. So, we're not all geeks. Some are just pretending to be geeks or dressing up to be geeks when they go to the UN. But really, if we want to develop, and strengthen our movements, the feminist movements for transformation, we need to be able to communicate like ordinary people. So,
Yeah.
what do we mean by, this topic, fiscal race to the bottom? Why is it a feminist issue? Can you help us?
Yeah, sure. I am guilty of being sometimes I feel a bit like, imposter syndrome. I'm not an economist, but these things that we work on are so relevant to my everyday life, right? I've always worked around inequalities, and the more I work around inequalities, the more it's clear to me we can fight for rights on paper, right? But unless there's resourcing to make those rights come alive, we'll be fighting until the cows come home, as they say in my part of the world. And so I focus on macro level economics, because a lot of the time when many people think about economics and the global south and women, they will usually think about microfinance, financial
Yes.
inclusion, like
That's
small things,
yeah.
50 chicken projects, livelihood projects. And I mean, it's important and it's needed and it's cute, but is it really systems changing? Like, is anyone's life really going to get better for generations because they have 50 chickens of a project that they've started through a microfinance project? Hardly ever. And anyway, at the end of the day, like even if I do get a 50 chicken project, I still have to take my children to school. I have to go to a hospital. I have to be able to commute on a safe road, right? And these horizontal issues that affect every day of my life cannot be solved by a livelihood project. There has to be a more transformative, more systemic, like wholesome way to make sure that happens, right? And the economy is very simple. It's how fairly does our government collect revenue, and how equitably and fairly do we distribute that revenue through, for example, our budgets. Like how much money goes to maternal health care, how much money goes to childcare, how much money goes to taking care of the elderly, for example, right? And those conversations are women's issues, and that's a feminist issue. So they have to be at the center of conversation, they have to be at the table. But also, who gets taxed and how do they get taxed? And so, if there's a big multinational, and in our case, when we talk about multinationals, a lot of the time they will not be indigenous to our regions and our countries. They will be multinationals that are based in the global north. So there's a racist connotation to that too, right? And an inequality one as well. And so these companies that are doing business and extracting in our region. So for example, Africa loses between 50 and 80 billion dollars every year through illicit financial flows. And this is big, global north companies doing extractive mining activities or whatever it is on our continent, and finding ways to dodge taxes and take out their profits from our continent and really just not pay their fair share of tax. And I mean, we can call it very many big words, but really it's theft. And this pattern of theft has continued from generation to generation. We started with slavery, we had colonialism, and now this neo-colonial, neoliberal way of extracting. And that's shrouded in all these big words around, we can call it illicit financial flows, tax evasion, transfer pricing, all of these words. Yes, they're words and there are technical aspects to it, but at the bottom of everything, at the end point, it's a power dynamic and who is extracting from who and how do they do it. And it's shrouded in a lack of clarity and transparency. I think a lot of the time it's shrouded in technicalities, right, and making it harder for everybody to understand. But really, it's if you're mining in my country, pay your fair share of tax so I can provide public services like healthcare and water and electricity to my people. Because in the global north, nobody innovates around putting on a light switch or turning the tap on to get clean, drinkable water. But here, we don't have enough taxes to make sure that those are provided for citizens. And then, of course, you have all these, white savior projects around coming and having CSR projects to build 2 classrooms. And like, if you step on this pump 20 times, you will be able to pump some water for you. Like, no, just pay your fair share of tax and we'll be able to do our thing, right? It's actually very simple.
And stay at home. Crystal, I just found that very, very fantastic how you said 2 things. One is that you are not an economist, and then you went straight to say economy is a very simple thing. And that's what I really love about activists, because if this were an economist, it would say, oh, this is something very complicated and leave it to us. While you are saying the opposite. You are saying everybody should be involved because this relates to my daily life. And that is one thing that is very important for our audience, because they may think, oh yeah, you're activist, you're doing all of these crazy things, and you have purple lipstick, the other crazy one has white hair, the other has tattoos, the other one is here always singing at the final moment when she gets her inspiration. So you need to be crazy, but I'm a normal person. And now you're saying it's actually easy and it's actually very important for our daily lives. So that is one thing I really wanted to say. And for our audience out there, I think it's very important to see that the technicalities are meant for to keep people away.
Yeah.
Once you really are interested, it's actually something that it compels us all. And the second thing you said was also in relation to this dynamic of the forency of the corporations and the race element that is there. You also use colonialism and imperialism, but this issue of race is very important. And we've been talking about feminists, but this issue of race is the first day that has come out very strongly. And perhaps you want to talk about a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, a feminist analysis will always put power at the center of analysis, right? And if you put power at the center of analysis, race has to come up. Race, class, disability, ability, religion, sexual orientation, all of those things. And so if you're an intersectional feminist, your feminism will have all of that as an analysis at its core. So for me, from an African perspective, it's very clear that race does come in so strongly when I look at everything from even vaccine equity, right? What we're going through right now, right? COVAX, with all these grand promises to provide vaccines for everyone, and that hasn't come through. When we have Strive Masiwa, who is a capitalist in Africa, really coming up and saying, listen, this is unbelievable, right? We cannot be talking about this. We're not even asking for charity anymore. We need to be able to produce our own vaccine. And even when COVAX, the few vaccines that African countries got from COVAX, there was a period where the EU was not recognizing them as valid vaccines only because they were developed in India. If that's not racist, I don't know what is, because it's the same active ingredient as AstraZeneca given across the rest of the world, right? And so it's very, very apparent. And it's heartbreaking because as COVID was happening throughout the world last year, I thought, finally, this is the moment where the world decides collectively, this stuff doesn't work for us. This neo-colonial, neoliberal, capitalist, market-focused way of organizing our economies doesn't work. This pandemic is constantly throwing the fact that it doesn't work in our faces, throwing the fact that who upholds communities, who upholds economies is women, frontline workers, nurses, caregivers, right? And so they're the ones who are at the forefront of our economies and who are holding us up. But again, it was talked about, and we're going back to business as usual. The race dynamic with the TRIPS waiver or not being able to distribute vaccines across the world in a fair manner, again, has racist connotations. The way the OECD, which is a group of very rich countries that sets rules and frameworks for how tax is governed across the world, where African countries, Latin American countries, Asian countries don't have place at the table of that decision making, that's racist. That's racist when over 60% of labor globally, over 60% of raw materials globally comes from the global south, yet the global south only accrues less than 5% of global wealth. And so the inequalities there are so stark, and that is divided by race, basically. Also, when you look at this idea of corruption, because we're always told in the global south, you're not developing because your leaders are all corrupt. Yes, we have a corruption problem, but is it our biggest problem? No. Out of the $80 billion that leaves our continent in Africa, only 5% of that is via corruption. And so the power of the stories that we tell ourselves and that we get told is so important. But across, in that story, if you look at tax havens, which hold way more money than the 5% of corruption, all the red countries are usually in the global north. So let's talk about theft in the theft that it is, right? Let's not hide it behind big words, and let's really look at the amounts and the gravity of theft that we're talking about and begin to tell ourselves different stories and different narratives.
Yeah,
yes,
totally
thank you.
Agree.
Go ahead, Rena.
No, totally agree with you, Crystal, because I always felt that, like what you said, like all the technical terms and everything about revenue, about loss of revenue, about illicit financial flow is actually basically how the developed country is actually channeling the wealth. How the system is actually channeling the wealth from the poor countries to the rich, right? And then even I think that one of the I heard before, yeah, Crystal, that there is this. They said that, oh, developed countries are so nice, rich country give ODA, like for instance, $1.3 billion, but then actually there's some research saying that is actually $3.3 billion is coming out every time from the poor country to the rich, right? So for us in APRSM in Asia Pacific, we always say, hey, who's developing whom here, right? Like you actually, you're the thief, you actually taking our money and then actually get all the press, what do you call it? All the benefit for it, and etc. etc. So I totally agree with what you said, and then it's really really happening in our region too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and also let's also not forget that what's happening doesn't happen in vacuum. There's a history to it, which we must always remember. The slave
Yeah.
trade was an injection of trillions of dollars of free labor into a global north economy. And that's what fueled, through their growing of plantations of cotton, of sugar, that's what fueled the Industrial Revolution. So this idea that the Industrial Revolution was based on hard work and innovation and the smarts of the global north is nothing, right? And so you've developed a global north economy based on free labor, based on extracting from the global south in general, silver from Latin America, all of this, right? And currently, it's the same script, just with, different words and different jargon, but it's theft across, and it hasn't started now. There's patterns of it, and we have to join the dots. And maybe, not maybe, but I think it's really important to start having a conversation about reparations as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh,
But just to say that our audience doesn't necessarily know what we mean with trips, with illicit financial flows. So let us go back a bit. But let me add here my spoon to say that it is very important as well when we're thinking about how the world is heading, that we hear that our countries are corrupt, that all the governments of Africa are corrupt, governments in Asia are corrupt, in Latin America, oh gosh, the corruption. Whereas the developed countries, oh, they're so pure, they're so going with the rules, they're so decent and civilized, whereas we're uncivilized. And I just want to talk about this with Crystal, because she has all the data to debunk that immediately. And just to say, audience, please send us your comments and questions. And Denise Velez is saying, yes, we don't need more boring economists. Let's have more Crystal. I'm adding here with the Spice Girls.
I mean,
Crystal,
we've left the world to
tell us about
economists,
this
right?
issue of corruption.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a country where corruption is constantly on the news. And I worked in a governance space before, and corruption was the issue, transparency, like we need to be transparent. We're, stealing all these amounts of money. And it's constantly on our newspapers and the news, both nationally, sub-regionally, regionally, globally. It's always, at least from where I sit, African leaders stole this amount of money, stole this amount of money.
Horrible.
And it's always quoted in currencies that I understand, right? So millions of Kenyan shillings, billions of Kenyan shillings. But nobody ever talks about the amounts of money that are taken and stolen away from my country by Tullow Oil, which is excavating oil in the north of Kenya. Nobody ever talks about that. Nobody ever talks about how their contracts are not disclosed. And even my government has no idea how much exactly they're taking out of the soil of this country, right? And that money, and nobody's saying don't make a profit. By all means, make a profit, but do it fairly, do it justly. Make sure you're paying your fair share and what's due to the country that you're operating in. That money can be used for maternal health care, can be used for public schools, can be used for road networks, can be used for transport, can be used for a whole range of things. But even then, when our finances are found, when our resources are found in global north tax havens, this idea that we can't send you back the money because we are afraid that you will re-corrupt this money. And that is such a paternalistic, almost infantilization. This idea that the African state is incapable of providing for its citizens is so dangerous. And so I really question the power and the politics of narrative, of the words they use, of the narratives that we swallow, of the narratives that are constantly being told about us to us and that we constantly believe. And this happens across the board from Hollywood, movies that come out depicting African governments in a certain light with almost like always the same African accent. Africa is so diverse, we cannot have the same accent in all the movies ever. And so this constant narration that we're always the bad guys, right? And we're always thugs. We're always, just how an African citizen survives is really, really told in such a skewed way. Our sexuality as women is whittled down to reproduction and disease, for example. There's never anything about pleasure. And these narratives are so important in damaging even the way we think of ourselves. And yes, it's easy to, constantly think about corruption as our biggest issue because that's what's in our face. The local primary school isn't working and the teachers are unhappy because our local government official is stealing money. Yes, but in terms of in terms of comparing how much money they're stealing to how much money Talo is stealing in terms of avoiding to pay their fair share of taxes, it's incomparable. It's absolutely incomparable. And so a few years ago, ActionAid, I think it was, did a research in Ghana and found out that one lady in her little shop selling vegetables and local produce was actually paying more taxes than the multinational factory that she was operating beside. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? And again, who's carrying the burden? African women, as usual, will carry this. We'll carry multinationals, we'll carry men, we'll carry, everything, white supremacy, everything we will carry on our backs. So yeah, I think it's the power of narrative, the power of words, and the onus also is a little bit on us to make sure we're opening that up and not believing and swallowing everything that we're told, but taking a step back, opening it up and say, hey, hang on. What does this say about us and what's our story?
Yeah, and I want to say that there are many white INGOs, international organizations that are saying, oh, corruption is the most important thing, transparency for corruption at the governments. And they're actually rating governments, and those that are stealing the most, they're rating them on perception as, oh, these are the best ranked, whereas our countries are ranked as the worst. And just to say that there is this report in Africa, the Mbeki report, which started as a fabulous example on how we should fight against this theft that Crystal is calling for illicit financial flows and the flows that are not paid in our countries because the taxes are going to somewhere else. Yeah. Well, the Mbeki report said that in Africa, in the region, only 5% of the funding that was leaving was on corruption. For governments in the entire region, 5% was for corruption. 35% was for organized crime, criminal money, activities. And 65% was for tax havens allocated in Europe, in the US, and there we have the name of the countries. I mean, Ireland is becoming one of the most powerful tax havens, and they are so Puritan. Oh, no, it's because we are developing our new economic strategy for economic diversification. That is just to say that they're becoming tax haven and they're stealing money from our regions. But Africa is very important because we are hearing about Africa as is the poorest region. Oh, because you have the most corrupt and lousy governments ever. People is not doing their work. You don't know how to organize yourselves. And then we hear 65% of the funding generated in Africa is going to developed countries in fiscal paradise heavens, which is obscene. It's like, really, this is the amount of when we're talking about what is a colonial and current imperial dynamic going on in the world. That I see that you're just in shock.
Yeah, actually, it's appalling, no? Because now that I remember it, the concept of good governance that's become such a, it's become such a buzzword, I think in the 1990s. Supposedly this is an effort to clean up governance, rid it of corruption, rid it of bureaucracy and red tape. But now, trying to remember everything that's been happening, good governance is actually a concept that's been introduced by the IMF and the World Bank in order to allow them, entry into developing countries and tinker, restructure the bureaucracy so that precisely, there is institutionalized corruption, that 5% that you were talking about, that we will notice and that we will be shocked, no, because that's how dirty bureaucracy is. But conveniently leaving aside that 65% that huge corporations, in
Yeah.
conjunction with private corporations domestically, are funneling out of the country. So we focus on the 5% institutionalized corruption, and we try to clean it up under the rallying call of good governance. But little do we know that this is actually, it's so elegant, it's so scientific, the way they are trying to restructure our economy so that they get away,
Yeah.
siphoning off the wealth from developing countries in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America. So I've been silent because it's just percolating in me.
Yeah, and Tete,
You need to be angry.
and Tete, the idea of like then they'll send in these technical assistants to help you, figure yourselves out. And it reminds me of the words of Thomas Sankara, who was talking about debt, but you can really put this, onto everything. And he says debt is neocolonialism in which colonizers have transformed themselves into technical assistants, or we should rather say technical assassins. And it's a saying, there are these technical assassins for debt, for taxation, for
I
trade.
like
They come into our
that.
countries and tell us what to do and how to do it. And really, they're really assassinating our economies.
That hurt.
I love it.
Sankara had some shots.
Amazing.
I have a question for all of us. Now, because of course, it's very important that we try to highlight, all of these uh, evil things. I can only describe it as evil. All
It
of
is
these
evil.
evil
It is
things
evil.
that are happening,
It is evil.
illegal, immoral,
Yeah.
as far as corporations getting away with, business tax evasion. But is it only a question of corporations? We lose out because of the corporations. But I'm more interested in your views around, what governments do to put tax upon tax upon tax on almost anything and everything that we ordinary consumers use up. Those
Yeah.
lots of regressive taxes that are also part and parcel of the impositions of the creditors, the banks, etc. I think it really hurts, the average
Yeah.
consumers like us. What you think about that?
Yeah, so I mean, currently it feels like, I
I
don't know
love
if you,
I love Crystal just start on before saying, let me take it out of my heart.
I need to breathe.
Yeah.
So this is getting me very emotional because I don't know, Asia didn't go through the structural adjustment programs. Latin America did.
We
With
did
the
also.
Some countries,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Africa did. In the late 80s, 90s, we went through structural adjustment programs, which ostensibly was, interest rates were adjusted. We weren't able to make our payments for the debt that we had accrued. And so, organizations like the World Bank and the IMF came into our countries and were like, listen, technical assassins, remember? For you guys to
Yes.
be able to pay your debt, you need to restructure how you run your economies. And to do that, you really need to shrink your government and your public sector because you're spending way too much on that. Way too much on that was on public health care, it was on education, it was on roads, it was on parastatals, it was on our local industries, and all of that got shut down, right? And in its place was the rise of privatization and liberalization because market theory, liberalize your economies, the market will self-correct, everything will work out. If something's not
Magically.
working,
Yeah.
it'll fix itself. And so through COVID and the whole entire world going through an economic crisis, and I know some countries, I think in Spain, there was some hospitals that were renationalized right in the beginning of COVID, and I think in Ireland as well. So this idea that the central role of the state is so important because there's a social contract, this contract between the state and citizens that says this is how we want to be governed, and this is how to govern us, and these are the tools, and this is how you pay for this provision of services, and we'll provide universal, accessible, affordable healthcare, education, access to life to be able to give you a dignified life, right? We shouldn't, that's why we have a government. Otherwise, each on our own, go off and like figure out your healthcare by yourself. And so it's hurting because that period of the 80s and 90s is coming back. And so just in the last
Yes.
few weeks in Kenya alone, the price of water is set to go up by 10 times. I'm talking about water by 10 times because we've signed this agreement with the World Bank to help us, with COVID recovery because we're building back better, whatever the hell that means. And so that cost is accrued on citizens. Taxes, just yesterday, fuel in the country went up by 70 US cents at a time where the economy and everybody's really, really struggling. It meant it just, a friend of mine who has a pig farm had to pay like $220 more per kilo of feed for her pigs, which means that cost will be, passed on, which means the cost of food is passed on. And that's a tax imposition on fuel, right? Women will always usually buy food and groceries for households. And when governments are really struggling, VAT, value added tax or consumable tax is the first thing to go up, right? It's the first thing to go up. Who feels it the most? Women. But what in turn is cut is, expenses and spending on things that women feel, maternal health care, for example.
Yeah.
Those are the first things that get cut off. So you're, imposing greater taxes on people who can't afford them. And these are people who are really struggling. Multinationals, you're like, oh, they provide us jobs. These jobs are cleaning jobs or, really the lowest cadre of jobs. And so that also tells you a story of what they're promising versus what we're getting. So they promise you the world. They're not paying their fair share of taxes. We can't afford to run our countries. Raise taxes on informal sector, which is largely women. On household consumable goods, again, that burden is on women. And so, it's unbelievable. And so I don't know. Again, feminists have been talking about this for millennia. The other day, I picked up a book by Development Alternatives for Women in a New Era from 1985. It could have been written in 2021 with COVID, really. The exact same things that they were calling for, the exact same things that we're calling for now. The way that taxes are structured to hurt the very poorest, the marginalized, the women, children, people who live on the fringes of economies, of societies, and by design, it continues to perpetuate that fringing of people.
Yeah.
We're
This is like
sad now.
anger, the silent anger. Everyone is like so angry, and then
Ugh.
I'm very, very much appalled by this, right? Because like instead of like taxing the rich, we are actually taxing the poor, and then it's like blatantly evil, like the system that we have now. And then also just also to note, even our tax money that we get, right, from the developing countries, like I read like one of the articles saying that it's also used for something like, paying for the situation where the corporation is actually able to sue the government, especially in the developing countries, right, and the poor countries, is really appalling because corporation have that rights, and then it's actually trump human rights, and then they able to say like if there is like a situation when the government policy or something that make them able to potentially lose their profit, then the corporation can sue them, right? And then it's happening everywhere. In Pakistan, in Asia, in Pakistan, is around what, 5 billion US dollar, and then it's using the Pakistan tax money from the people, yeah. And then this is just like so unfair.
More unfair is this whole public-private partnership nonsense again. And as we go through this, again, the World Bank is like, what's going to help you guys and figure out your problems is the private finance and private sector. If you have a problem with education, we can help you match with a private finance company, and they will do a public-private partnership, and, it'll solve all your problems. If there's legislation policies in your country that is a barrier for their entry into your country, you need to change that. But then also because like for African countries, it's so risky to invest in your countries, your government needs to de-risk their investment. This de-risking is done through taxpayers' money. So it's my money de-risking the investment of some American private sector company coming to set up a hospital in my country that has user fees, which means that most people can't afford it. And so if there's a gap in their ability to generate profit, my taxpayer money has to plug in that gap. But then also from a women's rights perspective, if maternal health care isn't profitable, then it's just not something that gets invested in. And so who sets priorities for what gets invested in or not? And how much of this money is going to be accruing to generations upon generations in the form of debt, in debt that we're accruing in foreign currency that we have no control over in terms of interest rates and fluctuating forex rates, right? It's incredible.
But Crystal, now UN Women is coming to our help, and they're bringing the private sector to privatize maternal health because she wants to bring in, the UN Women, they want to bring in private capital. So now they're going to help us privatize health and women's human rights and access to care, because that's how good they are in bringing private funding to the feminist agenda.
Oh,
so,
wow.
How about that? Yeah.
Can I roll my eyes further back? But also,
I think equality for you.
I have a headache.
We also have to think about racism, right, and class in this, because that presupposes that our states, Asian, African, Latin American states, are incapable of providing for their citizens. That we have to rely on private sector, which in all these cases are global north private sector, because you never hear about an African private sector company, in a big PPP deal, right? And so what are you saying?
No, and not really. I think it is something that we really need to analyze, because all of these trends about bringing the private sector because they're going to help solve everything. Someone sent me a link to an article to The Economist. Of course, I don't read The Economist, but in the opening sentence that I was able to read, because I'm not subscribed, it read, of course, all of us know about the progress of liberalism in the world and how it has helped humanity using the government to its minimum, increasing access to markets and give markets the freedom to do whatever it wants to do, and promoting whatever liberalism. And it's like, don't you see in the first sentence you're saying cutting back on the state and giving the market the will to decide on what to do? It's just profiting from every issue. They're profiting from the climate solutions, but that's for another episode. But let us go back to this issue on how whenever countries are saying, let us think, if I want to tax the rich, as there are many memes this week about taxing the rich. If we want to tax the rich, Crystal, can can we do that? Can my country, Mexico, tax the rich because we have one of the biggest millionaires? Or can Kenya tax its rich just as itself because this is a national policy? I'm becoming feminist. Now I'm going to promote a fiscal transformation. Can't we do that, Crystal?
Yeah, we can. We can. And also from, I'm not so sure about Latin America or Asia, but Africa has ATAF. ATAF is the African Tax Administrators Forum. And they're a collection of tax revenue authorities. And they've come together and they're setting up model legislation and policies that are fit for an African context that are progressive. If only our governments could listen, because the issue around tax has two sides. There's a very political one and there's a very technical one. The technical arm of thinkers in government get it. They understand. We need money to provide. This money needs to come from taxes for us to be able to collect enough taxes, because also it's very hard to collect taxes from poor people who are all over the place, but there's like 10 of you millionaires, right? We can just like progressively tax you guys and redistribute this money, right? But there's the political side of things that are half of them are part of a political elite that have private interest in business, and so will push against that progressive taxation.
Lobbying.
Exactly. And so it's up to us citizens to really understand this in its simplest form, because tax is also about redistribution. It has a redistributive role, right? And so how can we push our own governments, but also our own regions, so that regional policies and legislative frameworks can, speak down to national governments, at least from an African perspective? How can we put pressure both on the African Union and ATAF, but also at our national level governments to make sure that they're able to tax the rich and really have an understanding amongst everyone who's not an economist as to why that's important, right? And have it attached to political campaigns. How can it be a political campaign agenda? I think that's part of the work that we have to do. So when you're coming to us campaigning, because Kenya has election.
Oh no!
We lost you in the most exciting part, Crystal.
Yes, it was like, have an election.
Crystal, come back!
Oh no!
But it's really crazy.
Please be back.
On the one hand,
Crystal, we miss you.
The poor gets taxed even more. The rich gets away virtually tax-free. And then on the other hand, in the era of, we say that care is important, health is essential, we're seeing a lot of these austerity measures. The governments are cutting back to allow private corporations to come in. So that's why in Kenya, it's elections, Crystal.
Yes.
Go ahead, Crystal.
So it's election time. It's election time in Kenya in August. I want people who are looking to have me vote for them to tell me what their thinking is in terms of taxation. What are your thoughts on progressive taxation? What are your thoughts on taxing informal sectors? What are your thoughts on taxing fuel in the way that it's been taxed in the last week, right?
Yes.
Let's make that a political agenda. So it's not just, this very technical thing that's removed away from everyday life, even though it has the hugest impact on my ability to live a happy life.
But just a question very quickly, because I don't want this session to end and we only have 12 minutes. This is called the race to the bottom. What is that? I mean, really, what is that? Even I started working on these issues and I was like, what is that? What does that mean? I mean, anybody wants to explain? Yeah, explain to us. Enlighten us, please.
So I know about it from the African perspective, right? And so the race to the bottom is in terms of giving tax incentives to multinational companies, because there's this idea that if they invest in your country or they're doing business in your country, they come with all these things. They provide jobs, they will provide infrastructure. This infrastructure is usually CSR projects of building little roads and little schools that our government could have built if they had paid their taxes, but I digress.
Exactly.
And so they'll come to Kenya for example, and say, hey, we're looking to set up here. And we'll be like, great. So we're going to give you a tax holiday for 5 years. And in those 5 years, while you're operating, we won't tax you on ABCD. And Uganda, which is next door, will be like, what? Cut Uganda. We'll give you a tax holiday of 7 years and we'll zero rate XYZ, blah, blah, blah. And Tanzania next door is going to hear that and be like, no, hold up. We'll give you 9 years. How about that? And so they pit us against each other, but research has shown that these tax incentives are really the last of the things that they actually consider when they're looking to invest, right? So if I'm looking for copper, I'm going to go to Zambia because Zambia has copper. I'm not going to be able to go to Kenya. Kenya doesn't have copper. But I have no idea why our countries don't understand that. If you're not going to pay your taxes XYZ, if you're coming for copper, then you can leave. But this power dynamic where we're constantly begging, and it's attached to so many other global issues around the economy, around debt, around all sorts of trade agreements. And so many a time, and this is also a political machination, right? Many a time it's a lot more complicated. And so governments feel like their hands are tied. But I think, regions really should come together, harmonize our tax regimes, our tax legislation, policies, frameworks, and say, listen, this is our tax regime. You can go to Kenya, you can go to Tanzania, you can go to Uganda, you're going to get the same. So you don't want to come, If you come, this is what you're going to be paying, and it doesn't matter which country you're going to be operating, it's going to be all the same.
Yeah. This is the race to the bottom. It's like it's like a race of who goes down and down until we go to the zero, and it's like zero cannot help anybody. It's like, what the hell do you want a company to come here? They're not paying any taxes, they're not investing, they're using your land, they're depleting your resources, and it's like, what? I was going to say a bad word, but I'm not gonna do that today. I don't know why I should say it. What the fuck? So it's really like, that is the race to the bottom. And this is why it's also taxes a global issue, right? Because I remember an economist, a professor in Harvard, who was telling me, there is no global agenda on taxes. Taxes is a national issue. And I was like, what? It's precisely because of it's global that we cannot fix the issue, because governments, as Crystal was explaining, they're pitting against each other. And companies are actually harassing them. Oh, they're offering me lower. So how lower you can get? And it's insane. It's obscene. And this is what you're saying. I loved your proposals on regional action, just to really say, stop it. We're not going to go with this anymore.
Yeah. Resistance.
I know we're very short. Resistance. I know we're very short of time, but Crystal, just a quick clarification there. So you're saying that this ATAF, is it ATAF, the one that you said, is it actually a regional tax body forum or something like that in Africa or something? Because that's what we are trying to do, no? In Asia, for instance, in Asia and the Pacific, we really want to have a regional tax body forum that is actually harmonizing the regulation on tax, etc. And then, of course, the conversation to also push it in the global level, right? So I just want to hear a little bit on that, Crystal.
Yeah. Yes, it's a forum, and I put a link, and we can share it. It's a forum for tax administrators across the region. There has been conversation of having it officially as part of the African Union. It's not yet, but they're very small. I'm not so sure they have as much funding and staff and personnel as they should have, but definitely it's a start. They're doing really amazing work. They train national tax administrators. They're coming up with model tax, frameworks and legislation that African countries can use. They negotiate on behalf of us. At the OECD, I know they go head to head with them all the time. And so definitely, it's knowing that they exist and making sure that we push for our countries to listen and to engage with them as well.
Awesome. Crystal, you have Denise here who says, wow, 100% fans of everything you say.
Oh, thank you.
We're also 100% fans of you.
I'm a fan of everyone here.
And Evelyn was just commenting on your previous message I think it was you, Teter, who highlighted about the not commensurates with the profits made by corporates, right?
CSR, yeah.
CSR.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have very little time, but we have our activism segment now. We're very proud because we were able to get Crystal to dance with us. And this is Gutierrez talking about
everything.
Fifth, illicit financial flows. Tax avoidance, tax evasion, money laundering, and corruption already deprive developing countries of hundreds of billions of dollars every year. We must plug the leaks. And in the medium term, we need the courage and determination to revise national systems and international networks.
Oh my God, that's amazing. I love Crystal. Like, so, you know.
I wish I can be more elegant like Crystal.
Elegant.
I wish I had Rena's chair.
Like, yeah. Oh, I love it.
I was just immersing in the illicit financial flows.
Drowning.
So who was that guy who was speaking? Who was that guy? To those who do not recognize the voice.
The usual Guterres, because Guterres is let me say, he is the Secretary General of the UN. He should be promoting all of these global measures that we're saying, but his words are just empty words. And now it's like collage, you know, when you use a newspaper and you cut it down and you use it for something that is really pretty and it's worth it to the world. We're using that. We're doing our collage with Guterres words because they do not mean a thing when he talks, and it's like, let's make something useful out of these speeches. And so we were dancing to Guterres' speech on illicit financial flows, people.
Well, he said that we need courage.
Oh, but yesterday I read that he's calling for a summit of the futures. Emilia,
What
this
is
could
that?
be. He's calling for a summit of the futures. Immediately when I read about that, I thought about you know, the summit for reconstruction. So
Yeah, hopefully.
is finally listening to civil society.
You mean like a conference of the crisis? That's what we really need.
That's right.
Yeah, okay, Crystal, we have 3 minutes, but we need to bring you back because I can't believe the hour went so fast.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy it, Crystal.
I really did. This has brought me so much like joy, but also reinvigorated my otherwise very boring days sometimes of Zoom. But also it was so refreshing to just have a conversation in a safe space in words that everybody can understand. Really.
That's right.
Yeah, it's not that safe if it's going Facebook, but
I mean, you know, it's safe with this group.
yeah,
We'll fight that fight
we're-
when we get there.
But you know, I'm thinking we should just have a session on experiences in advocacy. Like, what do you do when you travel, when you meet people, when you meet delegates and ambassadors in the hallways? What do you decide to wear? What is the food looking like? At what time? How many coffees do you have during the day? You know, it's like bringing the life of an activist here, because as Crystal says, I'm not an economist, but somehow she's the wisest woman talking about these issues. So it's like, Crystal, we want to know about your daily life. Like, how did you decide your purple lipstick? Let's make just an episode of that. Yes, the daily life of an activist. Yay!
I'm a Zoom activist now.
And the many costumes we wear in our
Yes.
That's true.
Arma. Yeah.
There's the UN outfit, the marching outfit, everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
The luggage that is needed for an activist.
Yes, and the melatonin for like no sleep.
The
No
melatonin.
sleep. Yes. I remember no sleep time with Amelia.
Yeah. But I really like it because in last Zoom, Bhumika was talking about the melanin, the difference between the melanin of those who are making decisions and those who are marching. And now we're bringing the melatonin needed from those who have melanin
because
to
they have to
fight those
travel
who
so
don't
far.
have melanin.
See how everything is connected?
Everything.
Love it. Oh my God, time flies, everyone.
I know. I'm gonna miss you again for
Sessions.
2 weeks.
Yes. Thank you, everybody.
I will watch this in 2 weeks.
Yeah.